China's economy is still growing faster than most major economies. Yet the latest numbers reveal something far more important. The engine that powered China's rise for 4 decades is no longer running the way it used to. Growth slowed sharply to an annualized 4.3% in the April to June quarter, the weakest pace in more than 3 years. That slowdown came despite a massive surge in exports, booming sales of electric vehicles, and a global race for artificial intelligence chips that has boosted Chinese manufacturers. In other words, China's factories are thriving while many Chinese consumers remain cautious. And that imbalance could become one of the defining economic stories of this decade, reshaping trade, technology, and geopolitical competition around the world. China entered 2026 with considerable momentum. The economy expanded at a strong 5% annualized pace during the first quarter, while exports accelerated rapidly despite persistent global uncertainty. Customs data showed exports rose 17.6% during the first half of the year, with June alone recording an extraordinary 27% year-on-year increase. High-tech industries drove much of that growth. Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers continued expanding their global footprint. Semiconductor production increased as Beijing invested heavily in domestic chip manufacturing. Robotics, artificial intelligence, aerospace, and advanced industrial equipment attracted record levels of investment. China now produces more than 60% of the world's electric vehicles and dominates battery manufacturing, accounting for roughly 3/4 of global lithium-ion battery production. But the second quarter told a very different story. Growth slowed to 4.3%, below market expectations and well below the first quarter's pace. The problem was not exports, the problem was domestic demand. Chinese households remain cautious after a prolonged property market downturn, slower wage growth, and uncertainty surrounding future employment. That leaves China with an unusual economic picture. World-class factories producing increasingly advanced products, while consumers at home spend far less aggressively than policymakers would like. The first reason this slowdown matters is that China's entire growth model is changing. For nearly 40 years, China's economy relied on 3 powerful engines: exports, massive infrastructure and property construction, and steadily rising household consumption. Today, that balance has shifted dramatically. Exports and high-tech manufacturing are carrying a much larger share of the burden. This transition is no accident. Beijing deliberately redirected investment towards strategic industries. Hundreds of billions of dollars have flowed into electric vehicles, batteries, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, robotics, renewable energy, and advanced semiconductor manufacturing. The goal is simple: dominate the industries that will define the global economy over the next several decades. The strategy has already produced remarkable results. Chinese companies like BYD have overtaken global rivals in electric vehicle sales. Domestic semiconductor production continues expanding despite US export restrictions. China has become a major player in AI hardware, industrial robotics, and clean energy technologies. However, this success creates a new challenge. High-tech manufacturing generates enormous economic value, but it does not create jobs on the same scale as traditional industries. An automated battery factory or semiconductor fabrication plant employs far fewer workers than labor-intensive manufacturing sectors such as textiles, furniture, or consumer goods. That means China can produce more sophisticated products while creating fewer employment opportunities for its growing middle class. And that leads directly to the second challenge. Chinese officials themselves have acknowledged the problem. The National Bureau of Statistics described the imbalance between strong supply and weak domestic demand as acute. Factories continue expanding production because exports remain exceptionally strong. China recorded a record global trade surplus of approximately $1.2 trillion last year, the largest in its history. Current export trends suggest another enormous surplus is possible in 2026. Meanwhile, households remain cautious. The property sector, which once accounted for nearly one-third of China's economic activity when related industries are included, continues struggling after years of declining home prices and financial stress among major developers. Since housing represents the primary source of wealth for many Chinese families, falling property values have significantly weakened consumer confidence. As a result, many households are delaying home purchases, cars, appliances, and other large expenses. Consumer spending has simply not kept pace with industrial production. This creates a serious policy dilemma. If China continues expanding production while domestic consumption remains weak, the country becomes even more dependent on overseas markets to absorb its output. That inevitably increases trade tensions with the United States, the European Union, India, and other major economies that already accuse Beijing of subsidizing industries and creating industrial overcapacity. And those economic tensions connect directly to an even larger geopolitical strategy. Beijing increasingly views technological leadership as a national security priority rather than simply an economic objective. Advanced semiconductors, artificial intelligence, robotics, electric vehicles, drones, and industrial automation are no longer just commercial industries. They are becoming essential tools of geopolitical influence and military competitiveness. That explains why Chinese leaders continue directing enormous resources toward frontier technologies even as domestic demand softens. Beijing appears willing to tolerate slower consumer-driven growth if doing so secures long-term leadership in industries that will shape future economic and military power. In effect, China is sacrificing some short-term economic balance in exchange for long-term technological dominance. The strategy certainly offers advantages. It strengthens China's position in global supply chains, reduces dependence on foreign technology, and increases its influence across emerging industries. But it also carries significant risks. If employment growth weakens further and consumer confidence fails to recover, domestic demand may not be strong enough to offset slower global demand during the next economic downturn. For Asia, a slower Chinese economy creates both risks and opportunities. Countries including South Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia may experience weaker demand in some sectors while facing much stronger competition from Chinese manufacturers in electronics, batteries, renewable energy equipment, and electric vehicles. For Europe and the United States, these figures reinforce concerns over China's industrial strategy. As Chinese exports of EVs, batteries, solar panels, and advanced technology continue rising, Western governments will likely expand tariffs, subsidies, investment screening, and industrial policies designed to protect domestic manufacturers. That transformation could fundamentally reshape global supply chains, international investment flows, technological competition, and geopolitical power for decades to come. China's latest slowdown is not simply evidence of economic weakness. It signals that Beijing is fundamentally rewriting its development model, and the world may soon discover that a slower-growing China can still emerge as an even more powerful technological and geopolitical competitor. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the International Desk, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the geopolitical stories shaping our world.